Oh, hey everybody, this is Joseph Aleo, the big kahuna behind Vikings versus Samurai, and in just 1 second, we are going to talk to Stuart Sharpe of Vikingverse. So let me see if I can connect him now. This is the fun part where I go to my phone and tap a few things out. All right, waiting on you, Ian. Come on and join us. Ian!
Hello!
In the flesh.
How are you? See, look, I've organised all of this very quickly because we've got a lovely little background.
Oh, well, I have a blank wall behind me because I don't want you to see my messy house. Actually, my house is not too messy. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well. It's exceedingly hot where I am, which is several hours north of you, but must be even hotter where you are because you're nearer the equator.
That's true. It's not too bad. I think it's about 78 degrees, so it's balmy, but not miserable. So I have no complaints.
Good.
So we are here to talk to you today about Vikingverse, and I don't know exactly when I first learned of you, but you know, Vikingverse. It's there in the title. There's a kindred connection, and I reached out to you. We had a nice conversation, and I thought, you know what? Let's do a little chat so you can remind me and tell everybody else what is Vikingverse, because it implies a larger story. What is Vikingverse?
The Vikingverse is a parallel timeline where the Vikings rule the seas and the stars. That's the crucial part. It's an alternative timeline, an alternative universe that comes about where Odin wreaks havoc with with history as we know it. He throws history to the wolves, and in doing so, he creates the Vikingverse, where everything that you see around you today kind of exists, but Vikingified. It's a pagan present where Christianity and all of the events of the Middle Ages didn't quite unfurl the way that history expected them to.
So what's the turning point? Where does history take a turn to the left?
Yeah, the point of divergence. There's a few, because it can kind of compounds itself. Every good tapestry weaver, like the Allfather, will make sure that he hasn't dropped any stitches. But the first point of divergence comes in the age of Charlemagne, and in real world history, Charlemagne waged war against the Saxons, the pagan people, for many decades, massacring them in some famous battles. So there's a point of divergence there where in real history, the Danes didn't come over their fortifications to support Widukind, who was the leader of the Saxons at that point. But in this history, in the Vikingverse history, they do, and they kind of rebuff and repel Charlemagne. So that's one, and then there's like I said, there's layered versions. There's a famous story in English history where Alfred the Great, who is the first real king of united England, is attacked mercilessly at a place called Chippenham on a night just before Christmas, a very religious and holy night. They're all Christian people, and the Vikings ignore that religious holiness and the sanctity of that day, and they just attack. But Alfred escapes into the marshes and then rebuilds his troops, reignites his people, and throws the Vikings out. And again, another point of divergence is that just doesn't happen. They catch Alfred with his pants down, so to speak, and the Danelaw, which is where the UK, as we know it today, is split in two between the Kingdom of Wessex in the south and the Danes who occupy the north and the east. That never happens. In fact, the Danelaw takes over the whole of the UK because Alfred, that last great king, is gone.
See, I ask this because, my comic, Vikings versus Samurai, it's a ridiculous concept, but anything I can do to help suspend the reader's disbelief and immerse in the story helps. And so in my little timeline, Canute's daughter marries Henry III, lays the foundation for the Viking Empire. You know, it's funny. I talked to Charles Stross briefly, science fiction writer Charles Stross, because he wrote a series of books called The Merchant Princess, and in an alternate reality, the Vikings rule the world. And so I said, well, you know, what was the point of Divergence? And he said, I don't know. I just made it up. I did a little hand waving. He's renowned for world building, but in this instance, he just, you know, waved his hands and wrote a line, and there you have it. But you said it's not just in the past, it's in the stars. Give us a little detail about that.
Well, it goes all the way through to this pagan president. And so there is, I suppose the equivalent of, the Apollo missions, and launching into space. There's always this concept in Norse mythology of the Nua Heimar, the 9 homeworlds, Jotunheim and
Right.
Alfheim. And so in mythological terms, they act as a kind of concertinaed hinterworlds. They're kind of just beyond the veil. You can get to them if you travel far enough. I wanted to recast them as exoplanets, so you can still get to them, and there are mechanisms which are analogous to stepping beyond the veil. I have something called thought and memory drive. Thought and memory drive is like hyperdrive or warp drive. It enables you to get there very quickly. Thought and memory were obviously famously Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin in their Old Norse equivalent. So I like this idea that using Norse mythology to power the kind of quintessential Norse vessels, those longships, those drakar, cast that into space, fling them into the stars, and then use places like Jotunheim as an exoplanet, and that's then where I set one of those comics, which is just here, the Jotun War, and there's a kind of pastiche on the cover of the old the flag at Iwo Jima, and that's the kind of the thought there is that in this Vikingverse equivalent of World War II, the Norse have to go up against the nightmares of old, the Jotun, what we might refer to as giants today, but really it means devourers. And so that's a kind of world-spanning war that takes place. I suppose it's the Norse equivalent of Star Wars.
So let me ask you, I mean, Vikings, they've always been hip. They've always been exciting, captured people's imagination. It comes and goes throughout history. But why, for you, why are Vikings so interesting and so fascinating to you?
I started writing about them because of Ragnarok and my own personal Ragnarok. Back in 2016, all kinds of nasty things happen. So Ragnarok is, if for people who don't know, is the twilight of the gods. It's the inevitable doom where Odin is swallowed by the Fenrir wolf. And because things like Mr. Trump getting elected, Brexit happening, my own company going down the toilet, there was lots of things that I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice just to be like the Norse gods? And and even though they have to face down their fate and get swallowed by the wolf, the world is reborn. They get a do-over. Balder and Honir and a few others, Thor's sons, re-emerge on the plains of Idavellir, and they set the chess pieces up on the golden tables again. It was just, I thought, that's so poetic, so wonderful. Wouldn't it be great to have a do-over? And that then gave me the idea about Odin wanting to change the timelines, the notion of this all-father paradox, a play on the grandfather paradox. If you knew you were going to get eaten by the wolf and it was inevitable, wouldn't you kind of mess around with things to stop it? So,
yes,
so that was some of my thinking.
So, getting back to Vikingverse, it's not just a comic book. It's a novel. It's a game. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yep. So there's a whole bunch of stuff just by me here.
Merch.
So the All-Father Paradox was the first novel. Just there in the white and black is the Old Norse Modern Times. That's a phrase book which tells you things like how to say these are not the droids you're looking for, or we're going to need a bigger boat. Things, the things, Mead Hall musings, all in Old Norse. So we worked with a professor called Angrimor Vidalin to put that together. And then, of course, there's When the Wolf Comes, which is just here. It's the RPG. There's a fair few copies of that piled up there. And that's based upon the Shadow of the Demon Lord rule set, which is by a veteran games designer called Rob Schwab. Rob licensed me his rules, and we've worked together on creating, bringing that Vikingverse setting into, I suppose, a Dungeons and Dragons style game.
So I have a question about that, because right now I'm in the process of writing a treatment for a comic book based on a science fiction survival horror role-playing game called Mothership. Great fun. And I'm taking one of our games and making it to the actual story of the comic book. Have you yourself run your own game, and has it sparked any ideas for your Vikingverse?
Yes. So it's a good question, because in actual fact, it became clear to me that writing novels was a lot less fun than creating adventures or sagas and playing them and seeing how they unfurl. I think the novel is very static. It's on the page. It can't be tinkered with. You write yourself into a corner. You've kind of got all of these, hanging threads you have to weave together. But with a game, it's much more fluid, much more chaotic, and it takes on a life of its own. So I've written 2 novels. Loki's Wager is the second one there. But the third one is still in abeyance, because I've had so much fun writing the games and the adventures. And so every time you play, you think, "Oh, I've got a new idea." In actual fact, just this afternoon, when you pinged me, you caught me because I'm sitting at my desk. And while this is great as this, this futuristic space Vikings style game, I actually want to do another cut of it as a Viking Age game, and just go back to basics and strip away the kind of some perhaps the more esoteric stuff, the spacefaring stuff, and really bring it back to basics. Because I think that what I've learned is that people really just do want to play a Viking in the milieu that they understand, and not necessarily the world that I've built around. I think they'll go hand in hand, or shall I say, be 2 horns of the same helmet. But that's what I'm going to tinker with. So that's what's been inspiring me, to answer your question, from playing the game, is to, well, let's just do another version of it that's just a bit more authentic.
2 horns of the same helmet. I like that phrase. I'm going to take that. I'm going to borrow it. I'm going to liberate it.
It's horrible in the sense that obviously Vikings never had horned helmets at all, but for the purposes of conveying the point, it will do.
So I'm going to ask you this. There are a lot of myths and misunderstandings about the Vikings, and the helmets is a perfect example. But at the same time, people sort of expect it in the fiction. So what are some of the cliches that you hate, that you want to avoid at all costs? And what are the things that you will go out of the way to include that you actually enjoy?
Yeah, another good question. So in the game itself, I've spent a lot of time trying to get the Viking crafts right. And that's the system of magic. So that's the Sever, that's the Gand, that's the Galder. And so Tolkien did all of this universe, a terrible injustice when he stole all of the Dverga. He stole all of the dwarves, Thorin and Durin. They're all lifted directly from the pages of Norse mythology. Same for Gandalf. Gandalf means wand elf. And his pointy-eared elves, living in the forest and twanging bows. All of that stuff is very heavily based on Norse mythology, but is so anodyne as to have done it a disservice. And so when D&D came along, and Gygax and those guys set up inspired by Tolkien, they diluted it further. And of course, Christianity had diluted these things over hundreds of years. They'd made Elfar or elves the hidden folk, or spirits at the end of the garden, or little fairies with Tinkerbell wings. And so the whole Norseness, that raw land spirit power, that vitality that came from these old legends, the fact that these creatures were really demons of the dead linked to your ancestors. There's a grittiness in the setting that comes across in things like the Northman film, which I noticed recently is now playing on Netflix, so people can check that out. But that's what I hate. I hate the tweeness of a lot of these settings, where they've taken that brute Norseness and they've turned it into pointy-eared elves and fireball spells, as opposed to the kind of the stuff that was really great and poetic and didn't need to be messed around with to begin with.
So I'm going to go off on a slight divergent topic here, but I'm assuming you've read some of Neil Price's work. Let's see, there's The Children of Ash and Elm. Oh,
I've actually got that.
I have not read
Just
that.
right
I
there.
have read The Viking Way. So obviously you've read it, so what do you think?
Um, yeah, great. I mean, it really gets inside the mindset. So if you are role playing, it's a good book to read. And The Viking Way is great as well for explaining, how they did approach magic, and how they did cast spells. I mean, obviously, it's all it's all a version of folklore, and it's not real magic. It's kind of hallucinogens and powders and scaring people witless, but it all added to the mystique. So I think some of those books by Neil Price have been very useful in shaping my world building. But also, when you have to create a parallel timeline, go back to the samurai and Viking stuff. If you're creating a parallel timeline, then create those tipping points and those launch pads for the story. And when you and I spoke, we talked about the notion that samurai and Viking culture is very similar, and there isn't actually an Old Norse phrase that works very well for samurai called Somerhurge, which is basically just like Einherjar is the kind of lone warrior from Valhalla. A Somerhurge is an honorable warrior. So it almost sounds like samurai as well, so the Somerhurge. And so I like that idea. And in my world, similar to yours, there is a meeting of Vikings and samurai. The eastern islands in Old Norse would be called the Morgeneidjar, the land of mourning. And so eventually, these two seafaring peoples, meet up, in the land of mourning, and not hilarity ensues, warfare ensues. But
Of course.
you can thread all of these things together. And I do think that there's an element, because the cultures would have touchstones, that perhaps a rapprochement could happen quite quickly, or eternal warfare. We'll have to see. That will perhaps be the fourth book.
So when I approached you to joining me on Instagram Live to talk, I said, well, it'll be about 10 minutes, but I knew we'd probably go a little long because
I've never spoken for 10 minutes in my life.
Yeah, I knew that was not going to happen, but it was like the way to get you,
Sure.
juiced up and ready to do it. But as long as we're talking, you're working on, the series, you're working on the role-playing game. What can we expect from you in the near future? Any releases? And are you going to attend any conventions this summer or this fall?
Still with those in reverse order, because I have a day job. I really have to attend conventions on the basis of the day job, and finding time to do it for the role-playing stuff is a little harder. It'd be nice to do, but they'd kind of have to be in my backyard and not conflict with work. So that's one. And in terms of what I'm doing, there's coming out not tomorrow, but a week tomorrow. So middle of July is a supplement for When the Wolf Comes called Death Metal, and not perhaps quite what you'd expect. I mean, it's a pun in the sense that death metal there's Viking metal and Amon Amarth and all of those kind of bands, and there's kind of inspired by that, but it's also death metal is what the Norse would probably call plutonium, uranium, that kind of thing. And so they're called. If you look at some of the new Icelandic terms, this uranium is Hellarbi, and so it's like hell, and hell is the realm of death, and RB is lead. So it translates into death metal broadly. So in the comic, in the Jotun War comic, there is a rain of fire that ends the war, which is equivalent to Hiroshima. And so death metal plays around not only with Norse myth, but also nuclear bombs, tactical nukes, that kind of thing, and gives rules to play with them. Obviously, it's difficult to play with nuclear weapons without getting your fingers burnt or your planet obliterated, but there's some fun rules in there for people who want to tinker with that kind of thing and want to set up themselves as effectively walking warheads.
All right. I think I actually have to stop talking to you because you're going to influence what I'm writing, because it's all great stuff. So let's bring it home. If people want to learn more about you or Vikingverse and they want to get some free media and dip their toes in the Vikingverse, where can they find you online, and where's the best place to follow you on social media?
It's all Vikingverse, vikingverse.com, Vikingverse on Threads and X and Facebook. I've had a week or so off from social media, just while I've been, what it's like. You get stuck into the writing, and so you can't do the promotion. But type in Vikingverse, and you will find me on whatever platform you're on.
And you will be justly rewarded, everybody. So before we get out of here, let me tell everybody what I'm up to. I will be attending San Diego Comic-Con. Actually, will not be in the halls. I will be outside, sweating it out, but taking photos of everybody in their lovely costumes. So if you want to meet up with me, hit me up on social media and we'll chat. There's a bunch of people who are going to be attending the convention that I'm going to meet up with. Next week, I will be in Chicago, and I don't know exactly what my plans are, but if you want to meet up, again, hit me up on social media. You can find me at VikingsVersusSamurai.com. That's VikingsVSSamurai.com. And of course, you can find me at VikingsVSSamurai on all your social media, your Mastodon, your Twitters, and well, X now, and Thread and whatnot. So, Ian, thanks so much for taking time out of your Sunday to chat with us.
It was absolutely my pleasure, and I hope to do it again once we've conquered the world.
Right on. All right, here's a part where I look like a dork and sign out. Here we go.
Cheers.